They laughed because they thought every mind could be predicted. Every question had an approved answer. Every path was already mapped. Then you made one quiet decision. You stopped accepting what everyone else called truth. Without realizing it, you followed a chain of logic no one expected anyone to see. Suddenly, the people who guarded certainty became uncomfortable, not because you were louder, stronger, or more powerful, but because you proved that independent thinking cannot be controlled. The moment you question fear instead of obeying it, invisible walls begin to crack. And once your mind becomes impossible to imprison, nothing they built to contain you can ever feel truly safe again. There comes a moment in every life when a person realizes that most of what they believe was handed to them long before they ever questioned it. The rules, the fears, the expectations, the definitions of success, and even the limits they place on themselves often come from voices outside their own mind. Families, schools, society, and authority figures can shape a person's thinking so deeply that they begin to mistake borrowed beliefs for personal truth. But the day you stop borrowing other people's beliefs is the day your real power begins. Independent thinking does not arrive with applause. It usually begins quietly with discomfort. You start to notice contradictions. You begin to ask why certain rules exist, why certain fears are repeated, and why so many people follow paths that make them unhappy. At first, these questions can feel dangerous because questioning accepted truths often threatens the comfort of certainty. But growth never comes from blind acceptance. Growth comes from the courage to examine what you have been taught and decide whether it truly belongs to you. Most people live inside invisible cages built from assumptions they never chose. They assume they are not capable enough, not talented enough, not worthy enough, or not allowed to dream beyond the boundaries placed around them. These assumptions can become so familiar that they feel like facts, but familiarity does not make something true. A belief repeated for years can still be false. The first step toward freedom is recognizing that many of your limitations may have been inherited, not earned. The moment you begin to question, you reclaim ownership of your mind. You stop asking, "What am I supposed to believe?" and start asking, "What do I know to be true?" That shift changes everything. Instead of reacting to the world based on fear or conditioning, you begin to respond with awareness. You become less controlled by opinions, trends, and pressure because your foundation is no longer built on borrowed ideas. It is built on personal understanding. This does not mean rejecting every belief you were given. Some lessons from others are valuable, wise, and worth keeping. The difference is that you choose them consciously. You examine them, test them against reality, and decide whether they align with your values and experience. A borrowed belief becomes your own only when you have questioned it and accepted it freely. Independent thinking also requires courage, because people are often uncomfortable when someone stops following the script. When you begin to think for yourself, you may face criticism, doubt, or resistance. Others may try to pull you back into familiar patterns because your freedom reminds them of the freedom they have not yet claimed. But their discomfort is not proof that you are wrong. Sometimes it is proof that you are finally seeing beyond the walls they accepted as permanent. The strongest minds are not the loudest minds. They are the minds willing to stand alone long enough to discover what is real. They are willing to ask difficult questions, admit when they are wrong, and change direction when new truth appears. Independent thinking is not rebellion for the sake of rebellion. It is the discipline of refusing to let fear, habit, or authority replace your own judgment. When you stop borrowing beliefs, you stop living someone else's version of your life. You begin to make choices based on clarity instead of pressure. You pursue goals because they matter to you, not because they impress others. You build confidence, not from approval, but from the knowledge that your decisions come from an examined mind. And once you learn to trust your own reasoning, the world becomes less intimidating because you are no longer waiting for permission to think, act, or become who you were meant to be. Most people believe that the greatest barriers in life are physical, financial, or social. In reality, the strongest barriers are often mental. They are built from assumptions that have gone unchallenged for so long that they appear permanent. These invisible walls shape the way people think, act, and respond to opportunities without them ever realizing it. The moment you begin to examine those assumptions instead of automatically accepting them, you discover a different way of thinking, one that doesn't rely on familiar patterns, but on careful observation, reasoning, and curiosity. Conventional thinking has its place. It allows societies to function and helps people make quick decisions in everyday life. But when conventional thinking becomes automatic, it can also limit creativity and growth. Many of history's greatest breakthroughs came from individuals who asked questions others ignored. They were willing to look at familiar problems from unfamiliar angles. Their strength was not that they possessed secret knowledge, but that they refused to stop at the first explanation they were given. A different way of reasoning often begins with a simple habit, asking better questions. Instead of accepting an answer because it is popular, you ask how it was reached. Instead of assuming something is impossible because everyone says it is, you examine the evidence. Instead of allowing fear to decide your next move, you separate facts from assumptions. This process is uncomfortable because it demands patience, humility, and the willingness to admit that your first conclusion may not always be correct. Mental cages are rarely built with chains. They are built with repeated thoughts. Every time someone tells themselves they are not capable, they strengthen that belief. Every time they avoid a challenge because they expect failure, they reinforce the walls around their potential. Over time, these patterns become automatic. The person no longer sees the cage because it has become their normal reality. Breaking free requires recognizing that thoughts are not always facts. They are interpretations that can be questioned, refined, and replaced. One of the greatest advantages of disciplined thinking is that it reduces emotional manipulation. When you learn to pause before reacting, you create space between an event and your response. In that space, you regain control. You stop allowing fear, anger, or excitement to make every decision for you. Instead, you evaluate situations with greater clarity. That doesn't mean ignoring emotions. They provide valuable information, but it means refusing to let them become the only guide. This approach also changes how you deal with failure. Many people treat failure as evidence that they should stop trying. Independent thinkers treat failure as information. Every mistake reveals something that did not work, which brings them one step closer to discovering what does. Instead of protecting their ego, they protect their curiosity. They ask, "What can I learn from this?" rather than, "What does this say about me?" That shift transforms setbacks into opportunities for growth. Thinking differently does not mean rejecting every tradition or opposing every popular opinion. Sometimes the common answer is the correct one. The difference lies in how you arrive there. You don't agree because everyone else agrees. You agree because you have examined the reasoning and found it convincing. Likewise, if you disagree, you do so based on evidence and thoughtful analysis rather than rebellion for its own sake. True independence comes from disciplined judgment, not automatic opposition. As your thinking becomes more deliberate, you begin to notice possibilities that were always there, but previously hidden by habit. Challenges become puzzles instead of obstacles. Criticism becomes feedback instead of a personal attack. Uncertainty becomes an invitation to learn instead of a reason to panic. Your perspective expands because your mind is no longer confined by assumptions. that once defined your limits. The most powerful transformation does not happen when the world changes around you. It happens when you realize that your interpretation of the world shapes nearly every decision you make. Once you understand that beliefs can be examined, assumptions can be challenged, and perspectives can evolve, you become far more adaptable than circumstances. You are no longer trapped by the first story your mind tells you. Instead, you develop the ability to think with intention, question with humility, and act with confidence grounded in reason rather than habit. One of the greatest advantages you can develop is becoming difficult to predict, not by acting randomly, but by refusing to let your decisions be controlled by habits, pressure, or the expectations of others. Many people move through life following familiar patterns. They react to criticism with anger, to praise with pride, to fear with hesitation, and to uncertainty with panic. These reactions become so consistent that anyone paying attention can often predict what they will do next. The more predictable your responses become, the easier it is for circumstances, emotions, or even other people to influence your choices. An independent mind operates differently. It is guided by principles instead of impulses. It pauses before reacting. It evaluates before speaking. It observes before acting. This creates an element of unpredictability, not because the person lacks direction, but because they are no longer trapped by automatic behavior. Their actions come from deliberate thought rather than emotional reflexes. People who expect quick reactions often become confused when they encounter calm judgment instead. Most attempts at influence rely on predictable emotional patterns. Fear encourages hesitation. Flattery encourages overconfidence. Criticism can provoke defensiveness. Urgency can pressure people into rushed decisions. When you become aware of these patterns, you stop responding automatically. You learn to recognize the difference between a feeling and a fact. Emotions deserve attention, but they do not have to dictate every decision. By creating space between emotion and action, you strengthen your ability to choose wisely. This does not mean becoming cold or detached from life. Emotional intelligence is not the absence of emotion. It is the ability to understand emotions without becoming controlled by them. A calm response in a stressful moment is often far more effective than an impulsive reaction. Likewise, silence can sometimes communicate more confidence than endless explanation. The strongest response is not always the loudest one. It is often the most thoughtful. Another reason thoughtful people are harder to predict is that they continue learning. They do not cling to outdated opinions simply to appear consistent. When new evidence appears, they are willing to reconsider their conclusions. Some mistake this flexibility for uncertainty, but in reality, it reflects intellectual strength. Confidence is not pretending to know everything. Confidence is being secure enough to change your mind when better information becomes available. Many people also become predictable because they constantly seek approval. They shape their opinions to match the crowd, avoid difficult conversations, and choose safety over authenticity. While this may reduce conflict in the short term, it often creates internal conflict over time. Living according to external expectations slowly weakens personal conviction. In contrast, those who understand their values make decisions based on principles rather than popularity. Their consistency comes from character, not from trying to satisfy everyone around them. Patience is another quality that changes how people respond to challenges. In a culture that rewards immediate reactions, patience can seem unusual. Yet many of the best decisions require observation before action. Rushing toward every opportunity or reacting to every criticism often leads to unnecessary mistakes. Taking time to think does not indicate weakness. It demonstrates discipline. A measured response is often more effective than a fast one. Curiosity also plays an important role. Instead of assuming they already understand every situation, thoughtful individuals continue asking questions. They seek different perspectives, challenge their own assumptions, and remain open to learning. This habit prevents them from becoming trapped by rigid thinking. It allows them to adapt while staying grounded in their core values. Adaptability is one of the greatest strengths in an unpredictable world because it enables growth without sacrificing integrity. As you develop these habits, your confidence begins to come from within rather than from external validation. You no longer feel compelled to prove yourself through constant argument, attention, or approval. You become more comfortable listening than speaking, observing than reacting, and thinking before deciding. This quiet confidence is difficult to influence because it rests on self-awareness instead of public opinion. A disciplined mind cannot be easily defined by labels, manipulated by passing trends, or shaken by every challenge that appears. It continues to ask thoughtful questions, evaluate evidence, and act with purpose, even when circumstances become uncertain. That is the strength of independent thinking. It allows you to respond with clarity instead of impulse, to grow instead of merely repeat familiar patterns, and to navigate an unpredictable world with wisdom, resilience, and confidence rooted in careful judgment rather than automatic reaction. Silence is often misunderstood. Many people assume that the loudest voice carries the greatest influence, that constant explanation proves confidence, or that speaking first means leading. Yet, some of the most effective decisions are made in moments of quiet observation rather than endless conversation. A disciplined mind understands that silence is not emptiness. It is space for awareness, reflection, and deliberate action. It allows you to notice details that are easily missed when attention is consumed by the need to speak or react immediately. Modern life encourages constant noise. Notifications compete for attention. Opinions appear every second, and conversations often reward speed over accuracy. In such an environment, people can begin responding before they fully understand the situation. They interrupt, assume, and judge too quickly because they fear being left behind. The result is not greater wisdom, but greater confusion. A calm pause before speaking often reveals information that impulsive reactions would overlook. Observation is a skill strengthened through silence. When you spend more time watching than reacting, patterns become visible. You notice how people communicate, how situations develop, and how emotions influence decisions. This does not mean analyzing every interaction with suspicion. It means paying attention to reality instead of rushing to conclusions. Careful observation improves judgment because it is based on evidence rather than assumption. Silence also strengthens emotional control. In moments of conflict, there is often pressure to respond immediately. Someone criticizes you, and the instinct is to defend yourself. Someone misunderstands your intentions, and the impulse is to explain every detail. Yet immediate reactions are not always the wisest ones. Taking a moment to reflect allows emotions to settle so that your response comes from intention rather than impulse. A thoughtful reply often accomplishes far more than an emotional argument. This habit is especially valuable when facing uncertainty. Not every question requires an instant answer. Not every challenge demands immediate action. Some situations improve simply because you resisted the urge to react too quickly. Patience creates room for better decisions. It allows you to gather information, consider alternatives, and choose a response that aligns with your values rather than your temporary emotions. Many people believe confidence means having something to say about everything. In reality, genuine confidence often appears as comfort with uncertainty. It is the willingness to admit when you need more information instead of pretending to know what you do not. This kind of humility strengthens credibility because it places truth above appearance. People who constantly seek to appear knowledgeable may stop learning, while those willing to remain curious continue growing throughout their lives. Silence also protects focus. Every unnecessary argument, distraction, or attempt to win approval consumes mental energy that could be invested in meaningful goals. By choosing carefully where your attention goes, you preserve the resources needed for creativity, learning, and personal development. Focus is not about doing more things at once. It is about directing your effort toward what truly matters while letting unnecessary noise pass without demanding your reaction. Another advantage of thoughtful silence is that it improves communication. Listening carefully allows you to understand not only the words someone speaks, but also the concerns, motivations, and emotions behind them. When people feel genuinely heard, conversations become more productive. Instead of preparing your next response while the other person is still talking, you become fully present. This habit strengthens relationships because understanding often begins with listening rather than speaking. Silence is also a powerful companion to self-awareness. In quiet moments, you become more aware of your own thoughts, habits, and assumptions. You begin noticing which fears are based on evidence and which are simply stories your mind repeats. Reflection creates opportunities to correct mistakes, refine your beliefs, and strengthen your character. Without moments of quiet, it becomes easy to drift through life reacting to external events without understanding your internal motivations. Choosing silence does not mean avoiding difficult conversations or refusing to express yourself. There are times when speaking with honesty and courage is essential. The difference lies in intention. Thoughtful communication comes after careful consideration, not before it. Words carry greater weight when they are supported by understanding rather than driven by impulse. As this discipline grows, you become less influenced by chaos around you. You no longer feel obligated to answer every criticism, join every debate, or seek validation through constant visibility. Instead, your confidence is reflected in your consistency, your patience, and your ability to remain composed when circumstances become challenging. A quiet mind sees more clearly, listens more deeply, and chooses more wisely. In that stillness, you discover that true strength is not measured by the volume of your voice, but by the quality of your judgment, the steadiness of your character, and the clarity with which you act when it matters most. Before you can influence your circumstances, you must first learn to guide your own mind. Many people spend years trying to control everything around them while ignoring the one thing they have the greatest ability to shape: their thoughts, habits, and responses. They blame situations, wait for perfect opportunities, or hope that confidence will appear on its own. Yet lasting strength rarely begins with external success. It begins with the quiet discipline of learning how to direct your attention, manage your emotions, and make choices that align with your values, even when those choices are difficult. The mind naturally follows familiar patterns. Thoughts repeated often become habits, and habits repeated consistently shape character. If you constantly focus on fear, your world begins to appear filled with threats. If you repeatedly tell yourself that you are incapable, your actions will eventually reflect that belief. This is why awareness matters. You cannot change a pattern you refuse to notice. The first step toward mental discipline is recognizing the stories you tell yourself every day and asking whether they are supported by evidence or simply reinforced by repetition. Self-discipline is often misunderstood as punishment or restriction. In reality, it is the ability to choose what matters most over what feels easiest in the moment. It means continuing to work when motivation fades, remaining patient when progress is slow, and honoring your commitments even when no one is watching. Motivation comes and goes, but disciplined habits create consistency. Over time, consistency produces results that temporary enthusiasm alone cannot sustain. Emotional resilience develops through practice rather than comfort. Challenges, setbacks, and disappointments are not pleasant, but they provide opportunities to strengthen your ability to respond thoughtfully instead of impulsively. Every difficult moment presents a choice. You can allow frustration to dictate your actions, or you can pause, reflect, and choose a response that serves your long-term goals. This does not eliminate hardship, but it changes how hardship shapes you. Instead of becoming discouraged by every obstacle, you begin treating challenges as opportunities to develop patience, adaptability, and wisdom. One of the most valuable habits you can build is separating your identity from your temporary circumstances. Failing at a task does not make you a failure. Receiving criticism does not define your worth. Experiencing uncertainty does not mean you are incapable of finding direction. When you stop attaching your entire identity to every success or setback, you become more willing to learn, experiment, and improve. Growth becomes possible because mistakes are viewed as information rather than permanent labels. Mastering your mind also requires learning where to place your attention. Attention is one of your most valuable resources because whatever consistently receives your focus influences your thinking. If your attention is consumed by comparison, resentment, or endless distractions, your ability to create meaningful progress becomes limited. By intentionally directing your focus toward learning, purposeful action, and personal development, you gradually reshape the way you experience the world. Small improvements repeated consistently often produce greater results than dramatic changes attempted only once. Another important part of mental strength is accepting responsibility without carrying unnecessary blame. Responsibility means recognizing that while you cannot control every event, you can influence your response to those events. This perspective encourages action instead of helplessness. Rather than asking why life is unfair, you begin asking what can be learned, what can be improved, and what step can be taken today. Responsibility empowers because it shifts attention from what cannot be changed to what can. Patience is equally essential. Many worthwhile goals require sustained effort over months or years. In a world that often celebrates immediate results, it is easy to become discouraged when progress is gradual. Yet meaningful growth is rarely visible from one day to the next. Just as a tree develops its strongest roots beneath the surface before reaching upward, your character is strengthened through consistent effort, long before others notice the results. Trusting this process allows you to remain committed, even when recognition is absent. Your environment also influences your thinking. The ideas you consume, the conversations you engage in, and the people who surround you all shape your perspective. Choosing environments that encourage curiosity, integrity, and continuous learning makes it easier to maintain disciplined habits. This does not mean avoiding every disagreement or challenge. It means being intentional about what you allow to repeatedly influence your mindset. As your discipline deepens, you begin relying less on external validation and more on internal conviction. You make decisions because they reflect your principles, not because they guarantee approval. You continue learning because growth itself becomes rewarding. You remain steady when circumstances change because your confidence is grounded in preparation rather than appearance. Over time, mastering your mind transforms not only the way you think, but also the way you live, enabling you to meet uncertainty with clarity, respond to adversity with resilience, and pursue your goals with purpose, patience, and unwavering commitment. The world often encourages people to fit neatly into familiar categories. Labels can be useful for communication, but they can also become invisible boundaries that limit growth. When you accept a label as the complete definition of who you are, You risk overlooking abilities that have yet to be developed and possibilities that have yet to be explored. Personal growth begins when you understand that your identity is not fixed by the opinions of others or by your past experiences. It is shaped continually by your choices, your habits, and your willingness to learn. Many people spend years trying to become what others expect, rather than discovering what truly matters to them. They follow paths chosen by tradition, popularity, or external approval, without asking whether those paths align with their own values. Over time, this can create a quiet sense of dissatisfaction because success measured by someone else's standards rarely brings lasting fulfillment. A meaningful life is built by understanding your own principles and allowing them to guide your decisions, even when those decisions differ from what is expected. Living according to your values requires courage, because independent choices are not always immediately understood. There may be moments when people question your direction or misunderstand your intentions. That is a natural part of pursuing a path that reflects thoughtful conviction rather than automatic conformity. Respecting others does not require abandoning your own judgment. In fact, genuine respect becomes stronger when it is grounded in honesty instead of the desire to gain approval. One of the greatest strengths you can develop is adaptability. Adaptability does not mean changing your principles whenever circumstances become difficult. It means adjusting your methods while remaining faithful to your values. A person who refuses to learn eventually becomes trapped by outdated assumptions. A person who remains curious continues growing because every experience, whether successful or challenging, becomes an opportunity to improve understanding. Flexibility in learning, combined with consistency in character, creates resilience that endures through changing conditions. Growth also requires accepting that you will never know everything. Intellectual humility is not weakness. It is the recognition that every answer can lead to better question. People who believe they have nothing left to learn often stop progressing because certainty replaces curiosity. Those who remain open to new evidence and thoughtful discussion continue expanding their perspective throughout life. This willingness to learn protects against arrogance while strengthening wisdom. Your daily habits reveal more about your future than your occasional ambitions. Grand goals may inspire action, but consistent routines shape lasting change. Every small decision contributes to the person you are becoming. Reading instead of endlessly distracting yourself, practicing instead of procrastinating, reflecting instead of reacting. These ordinary choices accumulate over time. Character is rarely transformed by a single dramatic moment. More often, it is strengthened through countless quiet decisions made consistently. It is equally important to recognize that comparison can become a barrier to personal growth. Measuring your worth solely against someone else's achievements distracts you from your own progress. Every individual begins with different experiences, opportunities, strengths, and challenges. The more productive question is not whether you are ahead of someone else, but whether you are becoming wiser, more disciplined, and more compassionate than you were yesterday. Real progress is measured against your previous self rather than against another person's journey. As you become more secure in your values, external approval loses some of its power over your decisions. Praise becomes encouraging rather than necessary. Criticism becomes information rather than a threat to your identity. You learn to evaluate feedback carefully, accepting what is useful while letting go of opinions that are unsupported or unhelpful. This balance allows you to remain confident without becoming defensive and open-minded without losing your direction. Purpose also becomes clearer when your identity is rooted in principles instead of appearances. Instead of asking how to impress others, you begin asking how to contribute meaningfully. Instead of pursuing recognition as the ultimate goal, You focus on creating value through your actions, your integrity, and your commitment to continual improvement. This shift creates a more stable foundation because purpose guided by values remains meaningful. Even when circumstances change, the person you become is ultimately shaped less by the labels assigned to you and more by the decisions you make each day. Every thoughtful choice strengthens your character. Every lesson learned expands your understanding. Every challenge faced with patience deepens your resilience. By remaining curious, adaptable, disciplined, and guided by principles rather than appearances, you develop a mindset that continues to evolve without losing its integrity. In doing so, you create a life defined not by expectations placed upon you, but by the wisdom, courage, and purpose with which you choose to grow.